Vehicles in self-align. Stage 1, Stage 2, crash landing secured.
AFTS is ready for launch.
Falcon9's in startup. Stage 2, the startup pressures.
LD go for launch.
30. 20.
Stage 1's at liftoff pressures.
15.
Falcon9's configured for flight.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. GC moving towards launch pad operations to secure the pad editing.
GC copies, Wilco.
T plus 1 minute and 17 seconds into flight. Falcon 9 approaching max Q. You've heard the call out, MVAC-D chilling. We're now getting the second stage engine ready for ignition. Several activities coming up here very shortly. At T plus 2 minutes and 24 seconds, we expect main engine cutoff, followed immediately by stage separation and ignition of the upper stage engine. Right after that, the first stage will begin the first of 3 burns to return us back to the Pacific Ocean to the drone ship parked offshore about 300 kilometers downrange. Coming up on MECO.
We have MECO. We have back ignition.
T plus 2 minutes and 47 seconds into flight. We've had successful stage separation and ignition of the upper stage engine. And as you can see, we've also relit 3 of the engines on the first stage to begin the sequence that will return it to the drone ship in the Pacific Ocean. Boost back burn lasts about 30 seconds. And we have fairing separation. Had a brief view of the Iridium satellites as the fairing separated. Again, it's just before dawn as we head south over the Pacific Ocean, so we're not getting any sunlight. First stage boost back burn did complete. Fairing did successfully separate. We're waiting to hear the drone ship AOS, that's acquisition of signal. That indicates the drone ship is receiving telemetry from the first stage. Second stage propulsion continues to look nominal, coming up at T plus 4 minutes into flight. T plus 5 minutes into the flight of Falcon 9 carrying 10 Iridium Next satellites. Next event in our timeline is in about 35 seconds. That'll be a second ignition of the Falcon 9 first stage, what we call the entry burn. This is a burn of 3 Merlin 1D engines that'll slow us down for the actual re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. The burn itself will last about 13 seconds. Meanwhile, second stage, performance continues to look good. The trajectory is good. Engine parameters look good.
Stage 1 entry startup.
And you see the flare on the screen. We have startup. It looks like all 3 engines are up and running. Also, you can see silhouetted the grid fins did deploy earlier. They'll now be used to guide us as we enter the Earth's atmosphere. And we've had shutdown of the entry burn.
Stage 1 AFTS has nuked.
The automated flight termination system, autonomous flight termination system has safed on the first stage. We're coming up on T plus 7 minutes. Stage 1 is headed back to the drone ship in the Pacific Ocean. Stage 2 still headed to its initial parking orbit. Shutdown of the second stage engine should be just over T plus 9 minutes into flight.
AOS.
Now we're getting ready for the landing burn of the first stage.
Landing burn start. Stage 1 landing successful.
Delta LS.
7.5 minutes into flight. You can hear from the applause. We lost the signal briefly, then it returned with a view of the first stage in that pre-dawn darkness, sitting on top of just read the instructions. Out in the Pacific Ocean, a successful landing of the first stage. Meanwhile, the primary mission continuing, the second stage, 7 minutes and 54 seconds into flight, a little more than a minute left to go. Propulsion continues to look good on the second stage engine as we power to the low Earth parking orbit carrying the 10 Iridium Next satellites.
Elciane, zooming in on the spire here.
Stage 2 AFTS has saved.
T plus 8 minutes and 38 seconds into flight. We've heard the autonomous flight termination system has been safed on the second stage call. Second stage just about to go into Earth orbit.
Yes, Eco.
Call out of SECO. Second stage engine cutoff. We're waiting right now for a call out from guidance, nav, and control. They're looking at the orbit of the second stage. Right now it looks at the telemetry we're getting. It looks like we've got a good orbit. This is the parking orbit of the second stage. This is the first of 2 orbits we're headed to today. Looks like we've got a good one here. What's going to happen now is we're entering a coast phase. You might have heard coast phase entry call out just a moment ago. We're going to coast about halfway around the Earth, passing over the Antarctica Peninsula, come up over Africa. We'll relight the second stage engine very briefly. That'll get us into the final orbit from which we'll deploy the 10 Iridium Next satellites. All of that's going to happen at about T plus 52 minutes. So right now, we're just past T plus 10 minutes into flight. We've had a good first stage landing after a great countdown and a liftoff. Second stage performance looked very good getting into low Earth orbit. And so we're now going to go through about a 41-minute coast period. So we're going to leave you an animation showing where the second stage of the Falcon 9 is as we're passing over various features on the Earth. We will resume live coverage of the upper stage mission and the separation of the Iridium Next satellites at T plus 51 minutes after the launch. So about 41 minutes from now, we'll come back, show you the second stage, second burn, and then we'll look for the 10 Iridium Next satellites and their separation. So with that, hang in there with us. We'll be back at T plus 51.
Acquisition.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Mission 3 for our Iridium Next satellite deployments. We're just past T plus 51 minutes since liftoff. We're coming up in less than a minute on reignition of the upper stage engine. This is a short burn of the MVAC-D engine lasting just about 4 seconds. That'll raise us to the circular altitude of 625 kilometers. Currently, on the view from space, we're using cold gas thrusters to help keep propellant settled at the bottom of the tank so that it's right on top of the turbo pump when we spin it for ignition of the engine. So we're gonna wait right now for ignition of the engine, and then we'll come back following that with a view on how the orbit looks. We've got ignition and we have shutdown of the MVAC-D engine. As I mentioned, it's a very short burn. It does not take much to add a lot of energy to the orbit with the thrust of the second stage engine. What we're waiting to hear right now is what the orbit looks like. And we've heard the call out. Guidance, Navigation, and Control has announced a nominal orbit insertion. So we're through the second burn of the upper stage engine. As you can see on the screen right now, a little bit of what you're looking at, that is oxygen, AC oxygen. There's a nice view of the Iridium satellites. We're going to go through a period of about 5 minutes as we get the second stage pointed in the right direction, make sure all the attitude and rates are correct before we begin the 15-minute sequence of deploying Iridium satellites. Now that's going to occur over several ground stations. We're currently, as you can see from the orbit map, we're to the east of the southern tip of the African continent. We will cross over several ground stations. We'll try to bring you as many of the satellite deployments as we can. There may be delays during that period for confirming separation, so we'll bring it to you once we know what the data shows us. But for now, we're in a good orbit. We're lining up for deployment of Iridium, and we're going to come back with live coverage in just a few minutes as we begin the sequence of deploying the 10 Iridium Next satellites. plus 56 minutes, 4 seconds since a great liftoff of Falcon 9. Falcon 9's second stage is in the desired orbit. The 10 Iridium next satellites are mounted on a dispenser on top of the second stage, and we're coming up on the deployment sequence. Over the next 15 minutes, we will separate 10 Iridium next satellites into the desired orbit. From this orbit, they will eventually raise themselves to their final orbit where they'll integrate into the constellation. So we expect in about half a minute, we should get deployment of the first satellite. The view of the satellites you see here, there are 10 satellites. They are in 2 stacks of 5. So we'll see some of the satellites deploy, others we won't. They're on the back side of the dispenser. They're not in view of the camera. So right now we're just counting down, waiting for the flight computer to transition to the deployment state to release the first Iridium next satellite.
First spacecraft deployed confirmed.
And we have confirmation. First spacecraft deployment is confirmed. I think we could see a little bit of motion there. That one was coming from the top of the stack, so it's kind of hard to see with the other satellites underneath it. Now, as a reminder, every 100 seconds we go through a sequence where we will deploy another satellite. Has deployed. You can see it. That's a view of the upper stage engine. For those who are wondering, that white lump that you see on the edge of the nozzle, that is solid oxygen. So if you can imagine the oxygen you breathe, not only is it cold enough to turn liquid, it's cold enough now in space to actually turn to liquid.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff of Falcon 9.
Very light and easy.
It's 10:20 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Friday, December 15th, and you're looking at a live shot of Space Launch Complex 40, where the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket is about to launch a Dragon mission to the International Space Station. Hello and welcome. My name is Kate Tice, and I'm a certification engineer, and I'm standing here in our SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Today is SpaceX's 13th cargo resupply mission to the International Space Station, or as you may hear us call it, the ISS. We're all excited for this particular mission because it's the first time that we're flying both a flight-proven first stage and a flight-proven Dragon. In other words, both of these vehicles have already gone to space before. This first stage flew 6 months ago on CRS-11, and the Dragon spacecraft flew on CRS-6 in April of 2015. Pretty cool stuff, and we'll talk more about this in just a moment. Also special about today, it's our return to Space Launch Complex 40. We've made lots of cool upgrades to the pad within the last year. This now gives us 3 operational launch sites. This one, 39A, both of which are in Florida, and our California launch site at Vandenberg Air Force Base. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Michael Hammersley, a materials engineer for our electronics group, and I'll be bringing you status updates over the course of this mission. As Kate mentioned today, for the first time we're flying two flight-proven vehicles, the Falcon9 first stage, which previously flew in June of this year on CRS-11, and the Dragon spacecraft, which previously flew in April 2015 on CRS-8. Both Falcon9 and Dragon were designed with reflight in mind, so the vehicle hardware is built to support multiple missions with minimal refurbishment in between. And for this mission, we've refurbished the thermal protection system on Dragon's exterior, so that's why it looks brand new. But you'll notice that the Falcon9 first stage hasn't been scrubbed down, and you can still see the soot from re-entry. The plan going forward is to not wash or repaint any of the first stage, although from time to time we may still scrub down or repaint parts or all of it if deemed beneficial. We did that in this mission on the inner stage and the legs, but for the most part, going forward, the soot from re-entry will remain. Key takeaway for Falcon and Dragon at the moment is that we are tracking no issues and we are on track for an on-time launch just 13 minutes from now. A vehicle was raised by the transport erector late last night, about 12 hours ago, and the no-go poll was conducted by launch control just over an hour ago. Propellant loading began shortly thereafter. Currently the first stage and the second stage are both full of RP1, the kerosene propellant, although we're going to top up the first stage at about T-minus 7 minutes just to make sure it's totally full. Helium loading began at T-minus 15 minutes, and that's what keeps the tank pressurized when we're emptying it of propellant. And Dragon is also getting ready. It began its auto sequence at T-minus 35 minutes. That's when it coordinates timing with Falcon 9 and makes sure its systems are all healthy. Next big step for Dragon is coming up at T-minus 8 minutes when it's going to move to internal power to support its mission over the 2 to 3 days that it's going to take to dock with the ISS. Currently the range is ready to support and the weather is looking absolutely gorgeous at the moment. No major clouds to be worried about, some stratocumulus. We've been launching balloons every 30 minutes or so to be checking on the wind speeds at various altitudes. There's nothing looking unsafe for launch on that front. We generally want those winds to be under about 30 miles an hour and make sure that there isn't too much wind shear, which is when the winds at different altitudes are moving in different directions. Overall, still very much a go for today's launch, and we've also made some upgrades to the pad. Let's take a look.
Good morning, my name is Tom Perderio. I'm a firmware engineer in the avionics department, replicate operations at LC39A, which is our pad just a few miles to the north. It's important to remember that this pad, Slick 40, was designed before the first Falcon 1 ever flew. So this rebuild includes lessons learned from over a decade of building and operating launch pads across the country. Some of the important improvements that we've made to the pad are new dog houses. These are the heavy metal shields that protect the hold downs, which are the large clamps that hold the rocket down right until it leaves the pad. We've also installed a new flame diverter system that can withstand much longer engine firings, which allows us to do more static fire testing here instead of shipping all of our reused cores back to McGregor, Texas. Upgrades to the strongback, which is the tower next to the rocket right here, also include new lift cylinders. You can see those new lift cylinders, they're the blue objects right here. These stronger lift cylinders allow us to do one continuous lift process from horizontal all the way to vertical, whereas before we were doing a two-step process. We've also completely upgraded the lock system on the pad. This allows us to do much faster densification and loading that LOX onto the rocket once it's dense. Overall, Slick 40 has been upgraded with additional redundancies to make it safe and reliable as its LC39A cousin to the north, which is helpful as SpaceX often sends employees and equipment between the two pads, so it's good to have as much commonality as possible between them. Together with Pad 39A and our West Coast launch site in Vandenberg, SpaceX now has 3 operational launch pads. More launch pads means more launches, which is the key to full and rapid reusability.
11 years ago, Dragon was just a design on a piece of paper. Today, it's the only vehicle flying that can deliver significant cargo both to and from the International Space Station, and it's been an exciting ride to get us to where we are. In 2010, SpaceX became the first private company to send a spacecraft to orbit and return it to Earth. 2 years later, in 2012, Dragon became the first privately developed spacecraft to visit the ISS. Since then, SpaceX has made a total of 12 trips to the ISS, and we're under contract with NASA for a total of 20 cargo resupply missions. We're currently flying cargo missions, but ultimately we will fly astronauts on crew missions, with our first crew demo mission slated for next year. Whether we're flying cargo or crew, our relationship with NASA is instrumental to mission progress and success. Today's mission marks the second time we've sent a previously flown Dragon to the ISS. The first time a Dragon was reused was on CRS-11 in April of this year. Today's spacecraft was flown for the first time on CRS-6 in April of 2015. That happens to be a mission that I remember quite well, as it was my first rocket launch as a SpaceX employee. Dragon has come a long way from just a design on a piece of paper, and we chatted with Dragon Mission Management Director Jessica Jensen to find out more about that journey as well as today's mission.
Hi, my name is Jessica Jensen. I'm the Director of Dragon Mission Management here at SpaceX. My group is the main interface with NASA for the Cargo Resupply Services contract. And what that means is we're responsible for two main areas. One is integrating the cargo on the vehicle, and two is meeting all of NASA's safety requirements. In our partnership with NASA, we have a contract for cargo resupply services to the space station. The first contract was set up for 12 missions, and we recently completed the 12th mission in September of this year. Then we have 8 more follow-on missions for this contract, and then after that, we jump onto the CRS-2 contract. And that is where we're going to be using the Crew Dragon vehicle to transport cargo to and from the space station. And the nice thing about that is the Crew Dragon vehicle has additional safety features beyond the vehicle we are currently flying, as well as a significant increase in capability of the type of research and science payloads we can fly. Dragon carries 2 types of cargo, and we carry about 3,600 pounds of cargo. These are all items that are going to stay inside the ISS, primarily for the astronauts that are there. So these are things such as food and coffee, but all kinds of science experiments as well. For the unpressurized cargo, this is International Space Station hardware or payloads that are destined for use on the outside of the space station. Almost just as important as carrying cargo to the space station is safely bringing cargo back home. So the first thing we do when a Dragon gets home is unload all of the cargo and turn that over to NASA. After that, Dragon is shipped to the SpaceX facility in McGregor, Texas. In order to refly a Dragon capsule or a Falcon9 first stage, several analyses, inspections, and tests have to be completed. And so it's one of the areas we do a significant amount of inspection and testing, and we also do it in coordination with NASA. NASA has been an amazing partner to SpaceX. We couldn't have done any of this without them. We look forward to carrying literally tons more cargo to the space station to keep the astronauts very busy.
As you just heard from Jessica, Dragon is packed full of supplies and science payloads for today's mission. Now, there are 2 main big external payloads in the trunk of the spacecraft. That's the lower section of the spacecraft right there. One of them is called the Total and Spectral Solar Irradiance Sensor, which measures the sun's solar energy flow to the Earth and how our atmosphere responds to it. And then also the Space Debris Sensor, which is a sensor that detects and measures the effects of tiny space junk particles that the ISS collides with during its trip around the Earth. Now, inside Dragon are dozens of other experiments, including technology demonstrators for cell science and fluid experiments, microgravity materials fabrication experiments, which attempt to manufacture polymers, crystals, and even fiber optics in space, and biology experiments, including plants, rodents, and even the behavior of astronauts themselves. There's even an experiment to grow barley in space, which would be the first step to an on-orbit brewery. Dragon serves a critical role not only in bringing these experiments up to the ISS, but also back down to the Earth for analysis once its mission is complete in just a few weeks from now.
We are at T-minus 5 minutes, and that means Falcon 9 is stepping into the final phases of terminal count. The liquid oxygen load on both stages just completed, and Falcon 9 is now performing its final checkouts to make sure that all of its primary systems will work in flight. Those checkouts include the communication systems and the avionics systems, all of which are looking totally nominal, just the way we like it. The engine chill began a few minutes ago at T-minus 7 minutes. That gets the engines cold enough to safely move propellant without causing it to accidentally boil. The next checkouts are the thrust vector control checkouts at T-minus 3 minutes, where we wiggle the engines to make sure they'll be able to properly steer Falcon 9 during ascent. Falcon 9 is going to enter startup mode at T-minus 1 minute, at which point it is in full control of the remainder of the countdown. Dragon, of course, also performing its own final checkouts to make sure all of its primary systems are going to be working in flight. Again, it's going to take a couple days to get to the space station. And just before liftoff, watch to see the strongback retract to give Falcon 9 a bit more clearance during launch. Currently, the range is a go. Everything weather-wise is still looking golden. And let's listen in to the last couple minutes of terminal count.
Motion's complete. Stage 1 LOX load closed out. Vehicles transitioning to internal power. Stage 2 LOX load closed out.
AFTS is ready for launch.
F9 is in startup.
LD is go for launch.
Stage 2 pressing for flight.
T-minus 30 seconds and count.
Stage 1 pressing for flight.
T-minus 15. It's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Liftoff. So your post-launch flight operations. Towers
You saw it on the screen and heard the call-outs. We We had successful liftoff of the Falcon 9 on time. A few seconds after that, it cleared the towers and then did a pitch kick maneuver. Currently, vehicle is supersonic. You may have just been able to make out a small sonic boom there. We're about to head to max Q, which is maximum aerodynamic pressure. That's the point at which the rocket is pushing hardest against the atmosphere.
Vehicle is passed through max Q.
Just finished that stage of flight.
MVAC engine chill has started.
MVAC engine chill gets the engines cold enough just in the way that the first stage engines perform its chill. And coming up shortly, we're going to have a few things in quick succession. The main engines are going to cut off, the two stages are going to separate, and the second engine will start. And the first stage is then going to make its way back towards landing zone 1 with a boost back burn.
We have Miko.
Stage separation.
And there we have it. Those 4 events all went in quick succession. The first stage currently boosting back. We've also gotten confirmation that the second stage trajectory is good.
Is that burn shut down?
Okay, so on the left-hand side of your screen, you just saw the grid fins deploy. Quick recap for those of you that may have just joined us. We've had a successful launch of Falcon 9 for Dragon to the International Space Station. We have had a stage separation, and on the left-hand side is the first stage, Falcon 9, returning back to landing zone 1 in Florida.
We just had a phenomenal camera shot from our ground tracking cameras of the first stage and second stage separating, and then that first stage boost back burn. Currently, the first stage on the left-hand side of your screen is about to enter its re-entry burn phase. This is when it slows itself down before it hits the dense part of the atmosphere so that there's no aerodynamic heating of those engines which are coming in head first.
And that shot that you see on the right-hand side of your screen, that is the second stage engine glowing brightly. Personally, one of my favorite shots that we can get during a launch as it carries Dragon towards the International Space Station. So first stage on the left-hand side, second stage on the right.
On the left-hand side, that first stage, you can see those cold gas thrusters. Those are orienting the stage as it goes to the upper regions of the atmosphere. And then as the air gets thicker and thicker on its way down, we start using those grid fins, which you just saw deploy, to steer the stage back towards a safe landing at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, landing zone 1.
Yeah. So we have a total of 3 burns that the first stage will perform. You've already saw the boost back burn. We're getting ready for the re-entry burn, and that's to slow it down. And then finally the landing burn. And we're about 30 seconds away from that re-entry.
You can actually see the edge of Cape Canaveral in the screen on the left-hand side there. So as we get closer and closer to the ground, we should be able to get continuous video all the way down towards touching down on that pad.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Daytime launch, can't get any better than that. They're gorgeous shots.
Remember on the right-hand side, the primary mission, that's a camera mounted towards the bottom of the second stage. On top of that second stage, the Dragon spacecraft. Let's get an update on how it's doing right now.
We're at T plus 5 minutes and 55 seconds, and the second stage is still moving along at full power towards the International Space Station. Quick recap of the mission thus far. First stage had an on-time launch at 10:26 Eastern. We've just moved into entry burn startup, and you can see that happening on the screen on your left side of the screen. We had a nominal ascent. Second stage separated from the first stage, which is still moving towards landing zone 1. The Dragon nose cone was deployed, and power and trajectory are both still looking good on stage 2.
Stage 1 AFTS has saved.
So we are just seconds away from that landing burn. The first stage on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see it's getting very close to Cape Canaveral. In just a second or two, that landing burn, the center engine will light up and take it softly down onto the ground.
Yes, we should be seeing that in just a couple of seconds. We're just past T plus 7 on the right-hand side, second stage, as it's carrying Dragon spacecraft towards the International Space Station, our primary mission. But on the left-hand side, let's tune in and watch this landing burn.
Landing burn has just started, as you can see. Watch for those landing leg deploy. Just a second or two.
You just saw the first stage land on landing zone 1. That marks the second successful visit to and from space for this particular booster. MVAC-D, the Merlin vacuum engine that you're currently seeing on your screen, has slowly begun to power down as expected. The second engine cutoff is coming up in about 20 seconds.
Second stage AFTS has saved.
At that point, the second stage and Dragon will be coasting towards its rendezvous with the International Space Station. We'll confirm we've entered the correct orbit, and then Dragon will deploy from the second stage.
EST code.
GNC confirms good orbit insertion.
So we had a successful landing of that first stage of the Falcon9. That's the second time for that particular booster. Right now we had a second engine cutoff of the second stage, and we're just waiting for the Dragon deploy, where the Dragon separates from the second stage of the rocket.
Right, so there you can see on your screen, we're waiting for that visual confirmation of Dragon deployment. After Dragon deploys, we will be waiting for the solar arrays to spread out, and then it'll be making its way to the International Space Station.
Acquisition signal.
So watching your screen right now, this is a camera pointing at the very bottom of the Dragon as it's docked right now to the second stage of the Falcon9. And there it is. That is a successful deployment of the Dragon spacecraft. You can see into the trunk, those external payloads in the very back of the trunk right now.
Right, so like we said before, that is the unpressurized section of Dragon. The pressurized, you can't see it from this particular view, but all of that will be making its way to the International Space Station over the next 3 days or so. We're expecting it to arrive on Sunday.
You may have also seen the two pods on the side of the trunk. Those are the solar panels. Currently they're folded up accordion style against the sides of the trunk. In just about a minute or so now, those covers are going to pop off, and then the solar panels are going to extend, which gives the Dragon the power it needs to get to the International Space Station.
Yeah, so there on your screen, that's a shot from the second stage, and that is Dragon moving away in its mission. And wow, that's...
So, now, Dragon doesn't just go directly to the International Space Station. It actually takes a series of burns to get there. And this happens over a period of about 36 to 72 hours after the deployment. These are both height adjust and co-elliptic burns, as you can see in this animation. The Dragon slowly moves itself closer and closer to the ISS until it's grabbed by the arm and can be berthed.
Yeah, so berthing is what we refer to as when the Canada arm reaches out, as you can see right there, grabs Dragon and then brings it in and mates it to the International Space Station. Docking, however, is whenever the Dragon itself will be docking itself to the International Space Station without the help of the Canada arm to bring it in.
Right now on your screen, or you could just see the second stage engine bell as it just coasts up there in space. Like I said, we just had a successful separation of the Dragon. We are just waiting for that solar panel to deploy. And then Dragon can make its way to the ISS over the next few days.
Yeah, so quick recap, just in case if you're just joining us, we had a successful launch of Falcon 9 as well as a successful landing. This is the second time that this particular rocket has launched and landed. We also have Dragon making its way to the International Space Station as successfully separated from the second stage. And this is also the second time that this Dragon spacecraft is being used as well.
You can see our mission control in Hawthorne, California right now. Everyone's very excited to be launching both a reused Falcon and reused Dragon. You can see there's usually a crowd that comes out for launch days, even though it's early in the morning. It's always good to see the SpaceX crowd coming out to watch a launch.
So the view on your right is a shot of the second engine. Oh, and there's the visual confirmation of the Dragon solar arrays deploying.
So those solar arrays are normally packed up against the side of the trunk. You can see them accordioning, folding out. Dragon has batteries on board that allow it to collect energy, and those solar arrays just make sure that it's topped up for the next few days as it gets closer and closer to the ISS.
Expected loss of signal, Bermuda.
So as you can see there, visual confirmation of the Dragon solar arrays deploying. At this point in time, that's all we're going to follow for today's webcast. However, that's not the end of the mission. Dragon still has a couple days to go before it reaches the International Space Station. But as of right now, it's been a wonderful start to our Friday morning. We had a successful launch, a successful landing, and a successful deployment for Dragon towards the International Space Station.
Though Dragon's mission is not yet complete, this is going to bring our webcast coverage to a close. Right now, we'd like to thank our customer, NASA, for helping us out and yet another Commercial Resupply Services mission. We'd like to thank the Air Force for supporting, and the FAA, of course, and you, the viewer, for tuning in. Thank you.
And if you'd like to come join us to work on missions like launching Dragon to the International Space Station, check us out at spacex.com/careers and look for future updates from us on our social media accounts.
And a sonic boom passes across the Florida Space Coast as the Falcon 9 first stage makes a pinpoint landing back at landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
LZ1, the F9 has landed. Landing operators proceed to procedure 11.100, section 3 on LZ1 net.
Meanwhile, in space, stage 2 of the Falcon 9 continues to carry the Dragon spacecraft. Passes across the Florida Space Coast as the Falcon 9 first stage makes a pinpoint landing back at landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
LZ1, the F9 has landed. Landing operators proceed to procedure 11.100, section 3 on LZ1 net.
Meanwhile, in space, stage 2 of the Falcon 9 continues to carry the Dragon spacecraft. Spacecraft separation. And Dragon is making its way away from the Falcon 9 second stage with the Earth limb in the background, headed toward its destiny and a rendezvous with the International Space Station on Sunday.
AFTS is ready for launch.
And the autonomous flight termination system is ready for launch.
F9 is in startup.
Falcon 9 rocket is in startup mode.
LD is go for launch.
Launch Director John Murator gives his final go for launch. T-minus 48 seconds and counting. Terminal count begins in 5 seconds. The pad water deluge system will be activated at T-minus 18 seconds.
30 seconds and counting.
The main engine controller will command the engine sequence start 3 seconds away from liftoff. T-minus 20 seconds.
Stage 1 pressing for flight.
T-minus 15. Minus 10,
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket and Dragon spacecraft, filled with science and supplies for humanity's research outpost in low Earth orbit, the International Space Station.
SpaceX ascent commentary will be performed by several people. The propulsion engineer calls out propulsion events. The avionics engineer calls out avionics health and Dragon separation. The range coordinator calls out Air Force satellite control network acquisition and loss of signal. And the ground station specialist calls out the SpaceX antenna acquisition and loss of signal.
At 1 minute 5 seconds after liftoff, Falcon 9 reaches transonic speed. The vehicle will pass through an area of maximum dynamic pressure, known as max Q, at 1 minute 18 seconds after liftoff. This is the point where mechanical stress on the rocket reaches its peak because of the rocket's velocity and resistance created by Earth's atmosphere.
Around 2 minutes 24 seconds into the flight, the 9 Merlin engines will sequentially shut down, and you'll hear the call MECO, which is main engine cutoff. This first stage will perform a boost back burn about 15 seconds later, heading back to nearby Cape Canaveral Air Force Station Landing Zone 1. We'll show you the landing on NASA TV about 8 minutes after launch, accompanied by the sonic boom just before landing.
MVAC engine chill has started.
One minute 50 seconds into the flight of Falcon, carrying Dragon toward the International Space Station. Standing by for main engine cutoff.
We have MECO.
And we have MECO, main engine cutoff. All 9 Falcon 9 engines have shut down as planned.
And the first and second stages have separated as planned.
7 seconds after separation, the second stage's single Merlin vacuum engine ignites to begin a 6.5 minute burn that brings Dragon into low Earth orbit. The engines produce 210,000 pounds of thrust. At 3 minutes 4 seconds into flight, Dragon's protective nose cone, which covers Dragon's berthing mechanism, will be jettisoned.
Three minutes 8 seconds into flight.
Boost back burn shut down.
And the first stage boost back burn has shut down as expected. Second stage carrying Dragon continues on its way toward the International Space Station. 4 minutes, 10 seconds after launch, the first stage apogee has been reached, its highest point of orbit. Everything continues normally with the second stage carrying Dragon. First stage entry burn is scheduled to begin 6 minutes, 23 seconds after launch, about 10:42 a.m.
Acquisition of signal Bermuda.
New Hampshire, acquisition of signal.
The New Hampshire tracking site acquires the second stage in Dragon. Meanwhile, you're watching live coverage of the first stage of the Falcon heading back toward Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, landing zone 1. 5 minutes, 31 seconds after launch. About 30 seconds away from the first stage entry burn.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
And stage 1 entry burn is underway. It's a burn of about 10 seconds.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
Falcon 9 first stage headed back toward Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, where it launched 6 minutes, 37 seconds ago.
Stage 2 performance nominal.
Everything going well with stage 2 carrying Dragon to the
Stage 1 AFTS has saved.
International Space Station.
Stage 1 is transonic.
Stage 1 is past the speed of sound. It's now subsonic.
Landing burn startup.
Landing burn underway. First stage landing legs will be deployed shortly. And a sonic boom passes across the Florida Space Coast as the Falcon 9 first stage makes a pinpoint landing back at landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
LZ1, the F9 has landed. Landing operators proceed to procedure 11.100, section 3 on LZ1net.
Meanwhile, in space, stage 2 of the Falcon 9 continues to carry the Dragon spacecraft. We're 8 minutes, 12 seconds after launch. Less than a minute away from second stage engine cutoff. That's scheduled for a mission lap time.
LDN countdown.
9 minutes, 5 seconds.
Copy.
"30 seconds away from second stage engine cutoff.
Second stage AFTS has saved.
"10 seconds away from second stage engine cutoff. And SECO is confirmed. In about a minute, at a mission elapsed time of 10 minutes, 5 seconds, Dragon will separate from Falcon 9's second stage, and seconds later, Dragon will reach its preliminary orbit.
Acquisition of signal Newfoundland.
Standing by for spacecraft separation. And Dragon is making its way away from the Falcon 9 second stage with the Earth limb in the background, headed toward its destiny and a rendezvous with the International Space Station on Sunday.
At 12 minutes into flight, the Dragon will deploy its solar arrays, and then after that begin a carefully choreographed series of Draco thruster firings to reach the space station.
Looking at the second stage engine, which did its job. And now a live view of controllers at the SpaceX Mission Control Center in Hawthorne, California.
Less than a minute away from solar array deploy.
Dragon makes its way away from the second stage. First part of its mission underway.
Dragon's propulsion system has successfully primed and all thrusters report ready for firing.
Standing by for confirmation of solar array deploy.
Expected loss of signal Bermuda.
Expected loss of signal, New Hampshire.
Looking at live views from SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California, as a team that assisted in the launch today and is tracking the progress of Dragon.
And we have confirmation of the Dragon solar array deploy. And as Dragon unfurls its solar wings, the spacecraft continues its journey to the International Space Station.
Dragon will arrive at the station on Sunday, December 17th, and NASA television coverage will begin at 4:30 a.m. for an expected capture at about 6 a.m. Installation coverage will follow at 7:30 a.m.
So with the successful launch and deploy of Dragon and the solar arrays, we'll now go back to Stephanie Martin.
Thanks, guys. And this concludes our live coverage of the launch of Falcon 9 and Dragon for the SpaceX CRS-13 mission. For more information about the International Space Station, please visit www.nasa.gov/station. And for more information about this mission, please visit www.nasa.gov/SpaceX. And don't forget to tune in to our post-launch news conference on NASA television at noon Eastern. I'm Stephanie Martin. From the team here at Kennedy Space Center, we'd like to thank you for joining us. Have a great day, and we will leave you with replays of today's launch.
Nine, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket and Dragon spacecraft filled with science and supplies for humanity's research outpost in low Earth orbit, the International Space Station.
SpaceX ascent commentary will be. One minute, 50 seconds into the flight of Falcon, carrying Dragon toward the International Space Station. Standing by for main engine cutoff.
We have MECO.
And we have MECO, main engine cutoff. All 9 Falcon 9 engines have shut down as planned.
And the first and second stages have separated as planned.
7 seconds after separation, the second stage's single Merlin vacuum engine ignites to begin a 6.5-minute burn that brings Dragon into low Earth orbit. The engines produce 210,000 pounds of thrust.
That's 10, 9,
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket and Dragon spacecraft filled with science and supplies for humanity's research outpost in low Earth orbit, the International Space Station.
SpaceX ascent commentary will be performed by several people. The propulsion engineer calls out propulsion events. The avionics engineer calls out avionics health and Dragon separation. The range coordinator calls out Air Force satellite control network acquisition and loss of signal. And the ground station specialist calls out the SpaceX antenna acquisition and loss of signal.
At 1 minute 5 seconds after liftoff, Falcon 9 reaches transonic speed. The vehicle will pass through an area of maximum dynamic pressure, known as max Q, at 1 minute 18 seconds after liftoff. This is the point where mechanical stress on the rocket reaches its peak because of the rocket's velocity and resistance created by Earth's atmosphere.
Around 2 minutes 24 seconds into the flight, the 9 Merlin engines will sequentially shut down and you'll hear the call MECO, which is main engine cutoff. This first stage will perform a boost back burn about 15 seconds later, heading back to nearby Cape Canaveral Air Force Station Landing Zone 1. We'll show you the landing on NASA TV about 8 minutes after launch, accompanied by the sonic boom just before landing.
Eight, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket and Dragon spacecraft filled with science and supplies for humanity's research outpost in low Earth orbit, the International Space Station.
SpaceX ascent commentary will be performed by several people. The propulsion engineer calls out propulsion events. The avionics engineer calls out avionics health and Dragon separation. The range coordinator calls out Air Force satellite control network acquisition and loss of signal. And the ground station specialist calls out the SpaceX antenna acquisition and loss of signal.
At 1 minute 5 seconds after liftoff, Falcon 9 reaches transonic speed. The vehicle will pass through an area of maximum dynamic pressure, known as max Q, at 1 minute 18 seconds after liftoff. This is the point where mechanical stress on the rocket reaches its peak because of the rocket's velocity and resistance created by Earth's atmosphere.
Around 2 minutes 24 seconds into the flight, the 9 Merlin engines will sequentially shut down, and you'll hear the call MECO.
Nine, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket and Dragon spacecraft filled with science and supplies for humanity's research outpost in low Earth orbit, the International Space Station.
SpaceX ascent commentary will be performed by several people. The propulsion engineer calls out propulsion events. The avionics engineer calls out avionics health and Dragon separation. The range coordinator calls out Air Force satellite control network acquisition and loss of signal. And the ground station specialist calls out the SpaceX antenna acquisition and loss of signal.
At 1 minute 5 seconds after liftoff, Falcon 9 reaches transonic speed. The vehicle will pass through an area of maximum dynamic pressure, known as max Q, at 1 minute 18 seconds after liftoff. This is the point where mechanical stress on the rocket reaches its peak because of the rocket's velocity and resistance created by Earth's atmosphere.
Around 2 minutes 24 seconds into the flight, the 9 Merlin engines will sequentially shut down, and you'll hear the call MECO, which is main engine cutoff. This first stage will perform a boost back burn about 15 seconds later, heading back to nearby Cape Canaveral Air Force Station Landing Zone 1. We'll show you the landing on NASA TV about 8 minutes after launch, accompanied by the sonic boom just before landing. And a sonic boom passes across the Florida Space Coast as the Falcon 9 first stage makes a pinpoint landing back at landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
LZ1, the F9 has landed. Landing operators proceed to procedure 11.100 section 3 on LZ1 net.
Meanwhile, in space, Stage 2 of the Falcon 9 continues to carry the Dragon spacecraft. Passes across the Florida Space Coast as the Falcon 9 first stage makes a pinpoint landing back at landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
LZ1, the F9 has landed. Landing operators proceed to procedure 11.100 section 3 on LZ1 net.
Meanwhile, in space, Stage 2 of the Falcon 9 continues to carry the Dragon spacecraft. Spacecraft separation. And Dragon is making its way away from the Falcon 9 second stage with the Earth limb in the background, headed toward its destiny and a rendezvous with the International Space Station on Sunday.
AFTS is ready for launch.
And the autonomous flight termination system is ready for launch.
F9 is in startup.
Falcon 9 rocket is in startup mode.
LD is go for launch.
Launch Director John Murator gives his final go for launch. T-minus 48 seconds and counting. Terminal count begins in 5 seconds. The pad water deluge system will be activated at T-minus 18 seconds.
30 seconds and counting.
The main engine controller will command the engine sequence start 3 seconds away from liftoff. T-minus 20 seconds.
Stage 1 pressing for flight.
T-minus 15. Minus 10,
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket and Dragon spacecraft filled with science and supplies for humanity's research outpost in low Earth orbit, the International Space Station.
SpaceX ascent commentary will be performed by several people. The propulsion engineer calls out propulsion events. The avionics engineer calls out avionics health and Dragon separation. The range coordinator calls out Air Force satellite control network acquisition and loss of signal. And the ground station specialist calls out the SpaceX antenna acquisition and loss of signal.
At 1 minute 5 seconds after liftoff, Falcon 9 reaches transonic speed. The vehicle will pass through an area of maximum dynamic pressure, known as max Q, at 1 minute 18 seconds after liftoff. This is the point where mechanical stress on the rocket reaches its peak because of the rocket's velocity and resistance created by Earth's atmosphere.
Around 2 minutes 24 seconds into the flight, the 9 Merlin engines will sequentially shut down, and you'll hear the call MECO, which is main engine cutoff. This first stage will perform a boost back burn about 15 seconds later, heading back to nearby Cape Canaveral Air Force Station landing zone 1. We'll show you the landing on NASA TV about 8 minutes after launch, accompanied by the sonic boom just before landing.
MVAC engine chill has started.
One minute, 50 seconds into the flight of Falcon, carrying Dragon toward the International Space Station. Standing by for main engine cutoff.
We have MECO.
And we have MECO, main engine cutoff. All 9 Falcon 9 engines have shut down as planned.
And the first and second stages have separated as planned.
7 seconds after separation, the second stage's single Merlin vacuum engine ignites to begin a 6.5 minute burn that brings Dragon into low Earth orbit. The engines produce 210,000 pounds of thrust. At 3 minutes, 4 seconds into flight, Dragon's protective nose cone, which covers Dragon's berthing mechanism, will be jettisoned.
Three minutes, 8 seconds into flight.
Boost back burn shut down.
And the first stage boost back burn has shut down as expected. Second stage carrying Dragon continues on its way toward the International Space Station. Four minutes, 10 seconds after launch, the first stage apogee has been reached, its highest point of orbit. Everything continues normally with the second stage carrying Dragon. First stage entry burn is scheduled to begin 6 minutes, 23 seconds after launch, about 10:42 a.m.
Acquisition of signal Bermuda.
New Hampshire, acquisition of signal.
The New Hampshire tracking site acquires the second stage in Dragon. Meanwhile, you're watching live coverage of the first stage of the Falcon heading back toward Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, landing zone 1. 5 minutes, 31 seconds after launch. About 30 seconds away from the first stage entry burn.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
And stage 1 entry burn is underway. It's a burn of about 10 seconds.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
Falcon 9 first stage headed back toward Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, where it launched 6 minutes, 37 seconds ago.
Stage 2 performance nominal.
Everything going well with Stage 2 carrying Dragon to the
Stage 1 AFTS has saved.
International Space Station.
Stage 1 is transonic.
Stage 1 is past the speed of sound. It's now subsonic.
Landing burn startup.
Landing burn underway. First stage landing legs will be deployed shortly. And a sonic boom passes across the Florida Space Coast as the Falcon 9 first stage makes a pinpoint landing back at landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
LZ1, the F9 has landed. Landing operators proceed to procedure 11.100, section 3 on LZ1 net.
Meanwhile, in space, Stage 2 of the Falcon 9 continues to carry the Dragon spacecraft. We're 8 minutes, 12 seconds after launch. Less than a minute away from second stage engine cutoff. That's scheduled for a mission lap time.
LD on countdown.
9 minutes, 5 seconds.
Copy.
"30 seconds away from second stage engine cutoff.
Second stage AFTS has saved.
"10 seconds away from second stage engine cutoff. And SECO is confirmed. In about a minute, at a mission lapse time of 10 minutes, 5 seconds, Dragon will separate from Falcon 9's second stage, and seconds later, Dragon will reach its preliminary orbit.
Acquisition of signal in Newfoundland.
Standing by for spacecraft separation. And Dragon is making its way away from the Falcon 9 second stage with the Earth limb in the background, headed toward its destiny and a rendezvous with the International Space Station on Sunday.
At 12 minutes into flight, the Dragon will deploy its solar arrays, and then after that begin a carefully choreographed series of Draco thruster firings to reach the space station.
Looking at the second stage engine, which did its job, and now a live view of controllers at the SpaceX Mission Control Center in Hawthorne, California.
Less than a minute away from solar array deploy.
Dragon makes its way away from the second stage. First part of its mission underway.
Dragon's propulsion system has successfully primed, and all thrusters report ready for firing.
Standing by for confirmation of solar array deploy.
Expected loss of signal, Bermuda.
Expected loss of signal, New Hampshire.
Looking at live views from SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California, as a team that assisted in the launch today and is tracking the progress of Dragon.
And we have confirmation of the Dragon solar array deploy. And as Dragon unfurls its solar wings, the spacecraft continues its journey to the International Space Station.
Dragon will arrive at the station on Sunday, December 17th, and NASA television coverage will begin at 4:30 a.m. for an expected capture at about 6 a.m. Installation coverage will follow at 7:30 a.m.
So with the successful launch and deploy of Dragon and the solar arrays, we'll now go back to Stephanie Martin.
Thanks, guys. And this concludes our live coverage of the launch of Falcon 9 and Dragon for the SpaceX CRS-13 mission. For more information about the International Space Station, please visit www.nasa.gov/station. And for more information about this mission, please visit www.nasa.gov/SpaceX. And don't forget to tune in to our post-launch news conference on NASA television.
is 10, 9,
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket and Dragon spacecraft filled with science and supplies for humanity's research outpost in low Earth orbit, the International Space Station.
SpaceX ascent commentary will be performed by several people. The propulsion engineer calls out propulsion events. The avionics engineer calls out avionics health, and Dragon.
Good afternoon and welcome to our SpaceX CRS-13 post-launch news conference. I'm Stephanie Martin of NASA Communications. I'm joined by NASA Manager of the Transportation Integration Office for the International Space Station Program, Ven Fang, and the SpaceX Director of Dragon Mission Management, Jessica Jensen. We'll begin in the room with opening comments from our presenters, and then we'll take your questions. Ben?
Let's see, thank you. Let's see, what a spectacular launch. As a matter of fact, spectacular launch and landing on this great morning here in Florida. I must admit I had a little sense of deja vu as we sat here 6 months ago and watched the launch and landing very similar on this very same booster. So it was quite an achievement. It was very nice. Let's see. In order to get here for today on this reflown booster, our launch services team and the International Space Station Program team did very thorough assessments to get here. So I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, to our LSP team based out of here at KSC, as well as the NASA technical team that worked along with SpaceX in order to get us here for today's successful launch. Let's see, on orbit, the space station's in very good shape. The crew's ready to receive Dragon on Sunday morning, about 6 a.m. Central Time. Mark Vandehei is the prime robotics operator. Joe Akaba is the support. And we're very much looking forward to 4,800 pounds of critical research, resupply, and spares arriving at ISS on Sunday. Thank you.
Good morning, or it's almost afternoon now. So yeah, this was just a fantastic way to end the year for SpaceX East Coast launches. We started off the year with the 10th cargo resupply mission to the space station, and that was actually the first launch out of the reactivated historic Pad 39A. That's the same launch pad that astronauts flew to the moon on, many shuttle missions, and then we reactivated that pad. And CRS-10 was the first mission to launch off of that pad earlier this year. Then, as you all saw today, we had the newly built Pad 40, and it was great to have another CRS mission, our 4th Dragon of this year, launch off that pad for the first time on the first attempt. It's just a great day all around. I do want to give a special thanks to NASA. They were very flexible in scheduling us on with all their ISS traffic constraints and all their research and science constraints. We really want to thank them for everything you guys have done to, preserve this opportunity. And yeah, really happy we launched today. It was great. Let's see. I'd also like to recognize the incredible work by our Pad 40 team. Like I said, because it was a challenge, the launch dates in December after this point would be pretty much extremely challenging to not able to launch at all for a while to the ISS. So our teams had to work super hard to make sure that we were able to launch today, and they did a great job of that. So I just want to thank everyone on the SpaceX team, the Cape launch team, and NASA for their guidance along the way, the Air Force, the FAA, everyone who helped get this pad ready to go. It was a great launch, and the launch site director, John Murator, has confirmed at literally a few minutes after launch, he confirmed that everything on the pad looked great. The fuel systems were still up, lock systems, helium, everything looked great. The additional blast protection and all the additional work they put into this pad kept it strong, which means we'll be able to have much faster turnarounds in the future. So, as you may remember from the pre-launch conference, this was, a previously flown Dragon mission. So this capsule previously flew on CRS-6, and we're very excited to have it in orbit again. So it got placed into a nominal orbit, the solar arrays have deployed, and the next thing that happens is the guidance, navigation, and control bay door will open. That's a pretty long period, so that's going to happen next. Then we also had a flight-proven booster this mission. This booster supported the CRS-11 mission in June of this year. So that booster flew to space, came back, landed at Cape Canaveral Landing Zone 1, refurbished, launched today, and it landed again. I believe we have a video of that.
And a sonic boom passes across the Florida Space Coast as the Falcon 9 first stage makes a pinpoint landing back at Landing Zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
LZ-1, the F9 has landed. Landing operators proceed to procedure 11.100, section 3 on LZ-1 net.
So I will also encourage anyone who has never been to the Cape for a launch or a landing, come out here. The sonic booms are awesome and launches are great. So you should come out here. So yeah, it's been a successful mission so far. Again, I just want to thank NASA, the FAA, and the Air Force for all their support, all their guidance, and their tremendous help in getting us here today.
Thank you, Jessica. We'll now take your questions here in the room. If you have a question, please raise your hand. When I call on you, state your name, affiliation, to whom you're addressing your question. And we will also be taking questions on social media using hashtag AskNASA on Twitter. Let's see for the first question, Ken.
Hi, Ken Kramer, Universe Today and Space Up Close. Jessica, can you give us a preliminary run-through of how did these reused Falcon 9 and Dragon perform? And can you talk a little bit about the contamination issue with the second stage that delayed this a few days? Thanks.
Sure. So the performance of both Falcon 9 and Dragon were totally nominal. There's no difference. You literally wouldn't know whether it was a brand new booster and a brand new Dragon versus previously flown. And that's the whole point of it. So yeah, every parameter that I saw in the launch control room, I think Ben saw too, is nominal. We didn't see anything odd due to these being previously flown. With regards to the issue that we saw the past few days, we did find a small amount of particulate in the second stage fuel tank. We found that out after doing inspections after our static fire testing. The good news is we were able to flush all that out and verify all of our filters were in place. We checked everything on the ground side, as well as checking all the tanks again on Falcon 9. Even though we only saw this in the second stage fuel tank, out of an abundance of caution, we checked the second stage LOX tank, as well as the first stage fuel and LOX tanks. And so we did several flushes. We wanted to take a few extra days just to be safe. So we did many extra flushes and ensured that basically our ground systems and our flight systems were all good for flight.
Chris Gebhardt with NASA Spaceflight, with one for both of you. What's Dragon's nominal departure date from the ISS in January? And for Jessica, at a recent Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel meeting, there was talk about using a cargo Dragon to test out some heat shield defects to validate micrometeoroid impacts for Crew Dragon assessments. I was wondering if you could talk about what those potential defects you might put on a cargo Dragon heat shield would be, and what missions those are going to fly on.
Okay. Do you want to answer the first question about return?
Sure, that'll be a pretty quick one. We're currently nailing down the date, but it should be in the middle of January. We're looking at the on-orbit activities. We're looking at vehicle traffic and other activities on orbit, as well as the amount of time for the research on orbit. So it should be right around the middle of January.
Yes, and with regards to demonstrations on cargo vehicles, so the way we currently work is, it's great that we have this Dragon 1 vehicle as sort of a precursor to the crew missions we're going to fly. So what we do is we work with NASA on the cargo Dragon 1 missions to say, hey, is there a certain type of hardware we can fly, or is there, pieces of either a heat shield or the thermal protection system on the side that, we should do testing on the cargo Dragon mission to get some additional flight. And so we've done that on a few different experiments with them. And basically we have to make sure that whatever we're doing to the Dragon 1 capsule is going to be safe and reliable for that flight. That's of the utmost importance. But it's also this great way to learn more about the crew vehicle before people actually fly in it. So we have a really good relationship with NASA in working through those demonstrations.
Was the discussion at the ASAP meeting then about, potentially putting some defects in a cargo Dragon heat shield, just speculation of things that could be done, or is that an actual plan for a future mission before the Crew Dragons start flying?
Yeah, so I can't go into details of any of the experiments, and I apologize, I don't know exactly what was stated at the ASAP panel, but I can tell you that we do perform demonstration missions or demonstration objectives on Dragon 1.
LDs, go for launch.
Is there another question in the room about today's mission?
Emery Kelly with Florida Today. Jessica's question is for you. Why exactly is particulates in a second stage a bad thing?
Why is it a bad thing? So launches are crazy things. So basically a million things have to go right, but any one of them can go wrong. And particulates is one of those things that can go wrong. If they get clogged somewhere, you could have some issues with performance. So it's really hard to quantify exactly what would happen, but basically everything dealing with a launch, because once it takes off, you don't have commanding capability of the launch vehicle. Dragon, we have commanding capability once in orbit, but for Falcon 9, it runs autonomously through its entire flight, so once it's in the air. So based on that, you just want to take every precaution possible. Like I said, you want to make sure all those million things go right, and then not one of them goes wrong.
Perfect. We'll now take a question from #AskNASA on Twitter.
Yes, so at @ashower asks, will NASA be flying more reusable first stages?
Let's see. So we've agreed for this one flight, and we're going forward on a case-by-case basis. So there's many different aspects that we look at. We look at what that booster's life may have been in the past. We look at what our history might be with that booster and so forth. So at this point, we're case by case. We decided to do the one which launched today based on the study that took months really to get to, and we're considering that for the future as well, but no decision's been made yet.
Do we have another question in the room? Just 1 second.
You saw it on the screen and heard the call-outs. We had successful liftoff of
Swiss
the Falcon
Engineering
9 on
magazine
time.
and Swiss Space
A few
Association.
seconds after that, it
I
cleared
would
the
like to know
towers, and then,
what do you
did
like
pitch
the
kick
most?
maneuver.
Is it the
Currently
takeoff
vehicle is
or the
supersonic.
landing?
You may have just been able to make out a small
Is that for me?
sonic boom there. We're about to head to
Dragon
max
arrival.
Q.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the point at which the rocket is pushing hardest against the atmosphere.
Liftoff is my favorite. The primary mission is what matters. If you don't have that happen, the landings don't mean anything. So, the landings are really cool and really fun to watch, especially from here because you can see them live. But liftoff is definitely the best part.
MVAC engine chill has started.
Question in the corner.
MVAC engine chill gets
Hi, I'm Tom
the,
Cross with Tesla
engines
Radi.
cold enough,
I have
just
two
in
questions
the
for
way
you,
that
Jessica.
the first stage engines perform its
Can we
chill.
expect to see
Coming up
the
shortly,
pre-flown
we're gonna have
boosters
a few,
unpainted from now on? And
a few
also,
things in quick succession. The main
is there a
engines are
plan
gonna cut
to
off.
refly the third time
Two stages are
on
going to
any of them?
separate.
So
And the second engine will start. and the
for
first
whether they're
stage
going to
is
be
then going to make its way back
painted or not,
towards
going
landing zone one.
forward, I don't know exactly where we are with steel numbers. We've actually landed many rockets, and I don't have track of them right now. So I believe most of them in the future, you will see them as not painted, but there still might be some coming in as painted. We actually have to run some tests on them and make sure that the amount of soot on it is allowable. So some of them may be painted, some of them might not be. And yes, in the future, we do plan to reuse boosters at least 3 times.
We have Miko.
Is there one currently planned to be flown?
I don't know of one currently planned, but I don't know of one of this date.
Okay, thank you.
I believe we have another question from #AskNASA on Twitter.
Yes, Jason Linz asks, is the first stage the only part of the rocket that gets reused?
Yes. It's very difficult to bring the second
There we
stage
have it.
back
Those
from
4
orbit.
events all went in quick succession. The first stage currently boosting
Right here in the room.
Chris Gebhardt again with NASA Spaceflight. I don't know if you know this, Jessica, but status of the landing pads for the Falcon Heavy demonstration? Are they ready for that, or?
Yeah, so we
finalized?
only need to build one more landing pad. So Falcon Heavy is 3 cores. So for the demonstration mission, we are going to have LZ2 ready to support that mission. It's right next to LZ1.
We've also
and
gotten
then the other
confirmation
booster will
that
go to a
the,
drone ship landing.
Second stage trajectory is good.
Ken?
Can you talk about, please, first, congratulations on a great success, I forgot to say before, sorry. Why are they unpainted, these boosters, today and potentially in the future, and why were the stripes there? Thanks.
Yeah, so basically there's no reason to paint them. If we do conductivity checks, we verify thermal properties, and everything is good to go, there's just no reason to repaint it. You're just basically adding mass and spending resources that are not needed. So there's just not a requirement for it if we can verify that, like I said, the thermal properties of it are
Okay, so
acceptable
on the
for flight.
left-hand side of your
And the reason
screen,
that you
you
see
just
some
saw the
marks on
green
it
fins
is
deploy. Quick
when every
recap
booster
for those
comes
of you that
back,
may
there
have
is a
just
certain
joined
amount of
us. We
inspections
had
we
a
have to do. They're
successful
called
launch of
non-destructive
Falcon 9,
inspections, and a lot of times those
for
happen
Dragon
particularly
to
at
the
welded
International
joints
Space Station. We have
or
had a
certain other
stage
joints, and
separation.
so
And on the
that's just where we've
left-hand
had to clean
side
off the
is,
area to do an
first stage
inspection to make sure
Falcon
it's
9
good for the
returning
next
back
flight.
to landing zone 1 in Florida.
I believe we have another question from social
camera
media.
shot from our
Yeah,
ground
so
tracking
Chris
cameras
Cormier was
of,
wondering
the
how many
first stage and
times is a
second
Falcon 9
stage,
rocket
separating,
likely to be
and then that
reused?
first stage boost
How
back
many
burn.
times?
Currently, the first stage on the
So
left-hand side
in
of
the
your screen
future,
is
we are
about
going to reuse
enter
them a
its,
lot.
re-entry burn phase.
Won't give an exact number today, but it's going to be a lot. Yeah, we're certifying for at least 10 flights and hoping for a lot more.
Those engines which are coming in head first.
Question in the back of the room.
Bill Gellert from We Report Space. As far as fairing recovery, how many times have you got a piece of it fairing back, and will you be attempting that again for the Zuma launch?
So my expertise is Dragon. I don't know which missions we do fairing recoveries for, so I can't speak on that. But I do know we have been getting, we have been working fairing recovery. So that's about all I know. If I speak on that, I will probably say something
As the air gets thicker and thicker on its way down, we start using those grid fins.
Do we have any more questions in the room about today's mission?
To steer the stage back towards a safe landing at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
I believe that will conclude our post-launch news conference for today. You can always follow more on the SpaceX CRS mission by visiting www.nasa.gov/SpaceX, and you can keep up with the exciting research on the International Space Station at www.nasa.gov/station.
You can actually see the edge of
Thank you
Cape
for
Canaveral
joining us.
in the screen on the left-hand side there. As we get closer and closer to the ground, we should be able to get continuous video all the way down towards touching down on that pad. It's beautiful.
Daytime launch, can't get any better than that. They're gorgeous shots.
Remember on the right-hand side, the primary mission, that's a camera mounted towards the bottom of the second stage. On top of that second stage, the Dragon spacecraft. Let's get an update on how it's doing right now.
We're at T plus 5 minutes and 55 seconds, and the second stage is still moving along at full power towards the International Space Station. Quick recap of the mission thus far. First stage had an on-time launch at 10:26 Eastern. We've just moved into entry burn startup, and you can see that happening on the screen on your left side of the screen. We had a nominal ascent. Second stage separated from the first stage.